Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a really fascinating topic, economic indicators.
Ooh,
It's like
yes.
this language that economists use, right? It's how they tell us how economies are doing.
Yeah.
And, by understanding these indicators, we can kind of get like a backstage pass, right, to understanding the financial news.
Yes.
We can make smarter decisions. And maybe, just maybe even predict future trends.
It's like having a superpower.
It is a little bit, isn't it?
Mm,
So for this deep dive, we're going to be using a study guide as our main source,
okay.
and we're going to be supplementing it with some additional notes that we have.
Sounds good.
Now, what's really cool about this deep dive is that we're focusing specifically on South Africa.
Yes, that's right.
So we're not just exploring, these indicators generally,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also going to be uncovering how they're measured and interpreted in the unique context of the South African economy.
Exactly.
So let's say you're thinking about, I don't know, investing in South Africa.
Yeah.
This deep dive will give you the knowledge to assess the economic landscape, understand the data, and make, hopefully, more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Are you ready to dive in?
I am. Let's go.
All right, let's start with the fundamentals. Unit 1 of the study guide focuses on the objectives of macroeconomic policy.
Yes.
It's really laying the groundwork for why we even bother with these economic indicators in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's like understanding the why before we get to the what.
Precisely. The study guide highlights 5 main objectives.
Okay.
Economic growth,
Mhm.
full employment,
Okay.
price stability,
Mm-hmm.
balance of payments, equilibrium,
Okay.
and equitable distribution of income.
Wow. That's a lot to juggle.
It is.
So are governments and policymakers using economic indicators to kind of track their progress towards these goals?
Exactly. And by understanding these objectives, we can appreciate the relevance and significance of these indicators.
Okay.
Now let's move on to Unit 2, which introduces us to the concept of an economic indicator.
Okay. So this is where we start decoding the language
Precisely.
of economics.
The study guide defines an economic indicator as a statistic that provides information about the state of the economy,
Okay.
like a vital sign.
Oh,
It
okay.
gives us a snapshot of the economy's health.
So is it like if GDP is like a country's total income,
Huh.
inflation is like a fever,
Yeah.
and unemployment is like a cough?
That's a great analogy, and just like doctors use vital signs to diagnose and treat patients, economists use economic indicators to, well, monitor, analyze, and potentially influence economic activity.
Okay. That's starting to make a lot of sense. Now, Unit 2 also talk about the sources of economic data in South Africa.
Yes.
What are the key takeaways there?
So the study guide highlights 2 primary sources: Statistics South Africa, or Stats SA,
Okay.
and the South African Reserve Bank, or SARB.
Mm-hmm.
These are the main players responsible for collecting and publishing economic data.
So they're like the gatekeepers
Exactly.
of information.
And they release a variety of publications like the quarterly bulletin, the annual report, and the monthly data releases, which provide just tons of data on, well, various aspects of the economy.
That is a lot of data. It's starting to feel a little overwhelming.
I understand, but don't worry, we don't have to memorize everything.
Okay.
The key is to understand the broad categories of indicators and how they relate to those 5 macroeconomic objectives we were talking about earlier.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
Now, Unit 3 delves into the complexities of GDP.
Yes.
What are some of the key insights that we need to grasp?
All right, so Unit 3 distinguishes between 3 approaches to measuring GDP.
Okay.
Production,
Mm-hmm.
income,
Uh-huh.
and expenditure.
Okay.
And it emphasizes that while each approach offers, a different perspective, they should theoretically converge on the same GDP figure.
Can you give us a quick recap of each approach and why it's important?
Sure. So the production approach looks at the value added at each stage of production, from raw materials to the final product.
Mm-hmm.
This helps us understand the contributions of different sectors to the overall economy.
So we can see, like, how much value is being created by manufacturing, agriculture, tourism.
Precisely.
Okay, cool.
The income approach focuses on the incomes earned during production. So we're talking about wages, profits, rents.
Uh-huh.
This sheds light on how income is distributed among different factors of production.
Interesting. And what about the expenditure approach?
That one tracks spending on final goods and services by households, businesses, government, and the rest of the world. And it helps us understand the drivers of demand in the economy.
Got it. So by looking at GDP from these three different angles, we can kind of get a more comprehensive picture
Exactly.
of economic activity.
Unit 3 also highlights the limitations of GDP. It reminds us that GDP doesn't capture everything. Things like unpaid work,
Hmm.
environmental degradation,
Okay.
and income inequality are often excluded.
So GDP is a useful but imperfect
Precisely.
measure of well-being.
It's a starting point.
Yeah.
But we need to consider other indicators to get a complete picture. Now, Unit 4 introduces the concept of economic growth.
Okay. So this is where we start looking at how the economy is changing over time.
Exactly.
Okay.
The study guide defines economic growth as the increase in the production of goods and services in an economy over, a certain period of time. And it emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between real GDP growth, which accounts for inflation,
Hmm.
and nominal GDP growth, which doesn't.
Right, because if prices are rising, we might think the economy is growing when in reality it's just inflation creating that illusion.
Precisely. The study guide also introduces the formula for calculating growth rates, which is essential for understanding how economists track changes in GDP over time.
Okay.
It's simply the percentage change from one period to another.
Okay. So it's a way to quantify how much the economy is expanded or contracted.
Exactly. And this information is really crucial for making comparisons, whether over time, between countries,
Hmm.
or between different sectors of the economy.
I'm starting to see how all of these pieces fit together.
You're getting it. Unit 4 also briefly touches on business cycles.
Ah, yes, those ups and downs that economies seem to go through.
Precisely. The study guide describes these cycles as recurring periods of expansion and contraction in economic activity.
So it's like a natural rhythm of booms and busts.
Exactly. And understanding these cycles can be helpful for businesses and investors trying to, anticipate future trends.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like we're learning a whole new language
It is, isn't it?
for understanding how economies work.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a new language, and Unit 5 dives into population data.
Okay.
It highlights how population size, growth, and distribution can really have profound effects on the economy.
So it's not just about the numbers themselves, but also about the people.
Exactly. For example, a rapidly growing population can put a strain on things like resources and infrastructure,
Yeah.
whereas a shrinking population can lead to things like labor shortages and, slower economic growth.
That makes sense. The study guide also mentions the economically active population.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
So the economically active population refers to individuals who are either employed or actively looking for employment.
Okay.
It excludes those who are not in the labor force, such as children, retirees, and those who are not seeking work.
So it's the segment of the population that's participating in the job market.
Precisely. And understanding the size and composition of the economically active population is crucial for analyzing those labor market trends and assessing the economy's productive capacity.
This is all starting to connect. Now, Unit 6 delves into employment and unemployment,
Yes,
which are indicators that always seem to be in the news.
they are. And for a good reason, employment and unemployment levels are key indicators of an economy's health.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the well-being of its citizens.
So what are the key takeaways from this unit?
All right, so the study guide emphasizes the importance of understanding different definitions of unemployment. For example, it explains the distinction between the strict definition, which focuses on those who are actively seeking work,
Uh-huh.
and the expanded definition, which includes discouraged workers, those who have given up their job search.
Right, because someone who stopped looking for work might still want a job. They've just become disillusioned with, the
Exactly.
prospects.
And using this expanded definition can give us a more accurate picture of the true extent of unemployment, particularly in economies with high levels of informal employment,
Yeah,
or where searching for a job is just challenging.
that is an important nuance to consider.
Yes.
The study guide also mentions the employment coefficient.
Yes.
What is that all about?
The employment coefficient measures how many jobs are created for each percentage point increase in GDP growth.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a way to gauge the relationship between economic growth and job creation.
So a higher employment coefficient suggests that economic growth is translating into more job opportunities.
Precisely. And this information can be really valuable for policymakers trying to promote job creation and, well, reduce unemployment.
I'm starting to see how these indicators can be used to make, like, a real-world decisions.
Exactly. Now let's move on to Unit 7, which focuses on another hot-button issue, inflation.
Ah, yes, inflation, the silent thief that erodes our purchasing power.
Indeed. The study guide defines inflation as a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy
Okay.
over a certain period of time.
So it's not just a one-time price hike.
Right.
It's a persistent upward trend.
Precisely. And as you mentioned, inflation can have a significant impact on consumers,
Yeah.
businesses, and the overall economy.
So how do we even measure this slippery beast?
Economists use price indices to track inflation. These indices essentially measure changes in the prices of, a basket of goods and services over time.
So it's like creating a virtual shopping cart
Yes.
of everyday items
Uh-huh.
and seeing how much the total cost changes.
Exactly. And two of the commonly used price indices are the Consumer Price Index, CPI, and the Producer Price Index, PPI.
Okay, can you remind me what each of those measures?
So the CPI tracks the prices of goods and services that are purchased by households.
Okay.
It's a measure of inflation from the perspective of, the consumer.
Okay, so it reflects how much more expensive it's becoming to buy the things that we need and want.
Exactly. The PPI tracks prices at the wholesale level before goods reach consumers. It's a measure of inflation from the perspective of producers.
Okay, so it reflects changes in input costs.
Precisely. And by monitoring both the CPI and the PPI, economists can get a more comprehensive picture of inflation dynamics.
This is all incredibly valuable information. It's like we're learning to read the economic tea leaves.
You are.
And anticipate potential price hikes.
You're getting it. Now, Unit 7 also emphasizes the importance of understanding different methods for calculating inflation rates. It explains the difference between year-on-year inflation, which compares prices to the same month a year earlier,
Yeah.
and month-on-month inflation, which compares prices to the previous month.
Right, because depending on which method is used, the inflation figures can vary.
Exactly. And it's important to be aware of these differences when interpreting inflation data. Now, Unit 8 shifts our focus to the balance of payments.
The balance of payments. It's always seemed like a bit of a mystery to me.
It can seem that way at first, but it's actually quite straightforward. The study guide defines the balance of payments as a systematic record of all economic transactions between residents of a country and the rest of the world over a given period of time.
Okay, so it's like a country's financial diary,
Exactly.
tracking all the money flowing in and out.
And it's divided into several components: the current account,
Mm-hmm.
the capital account,
Yeah.
and the financial account.
Okay, can you give us a quick rundown of each component and why it matters?
Sure. So the current account tracks the flows of goods, services, income, and transfers between a country and the rest of the world. Think about things like exports, imports, tourism, and remittances.
So it's a measure of a country's trade balance and its overall, financial interaction
Exactly.
with other nations.
The capital account is usually smaller and covers capital transfers, like debt forgiveness or inheritances, and the acquisition or disposal of non-produced, non-financial assets.
Okay.
Think like patents or trademarks.
And the financial account.
The financial account tracks cross-border investments,
Mm.
including foreign direct investment, portfolio investment, and other financial flows. Essentially, it shows how much money is flowing into and out of a country for investment purposes.
So the balance of payments gives us like a comprehensive view of a country's financial position
Precisely.
in the global economy.
And by analyzing these flows, we can gain insights into a country's competitiveness, its attractiveness to foreign investors, and its overall economic stability. Now, Unit 9 delves into wages, productivity, and income distribution,
Okay.
all crucial aspects of understanding how an economy functions.
So this is where we start looking at who gets what and why.
Exactly. Unit 9 highlights the importance of distinguishing between nominal wages, the actual amounts people earn,
Mm-hmm.
and real wages, which account for, the effects of inflation on purchasing power.
So real wages tell us how much those earnings can actually buy.
Precisely. And understanding trends in real wages is crucial for assessing living standards and, the impact of economic policies.
The study guide also mentions productivity.
Yes.
Why is that so important?
So productivity refers to the efficiency with which inputs are transformed into outputs. In simpler terms, it's about how much we can produce with a given amount of resources.
So higher productivity means we can get more bang for our buck.
Exactly. And productivity growth is essential for driving economic growth, increasing wages, and just improving living standards over the long run.
This is all starting to make sense. Now, the study guide also touches on income distribution. What are the key insights there?
Right, so Unit 9 introduces the concept of income inequality, which refers to the unequal distribution of income among individuals or households in a society.
Right, because not everyone benefits equally
Precisely.
from economic growth.
And high levels of income inequality can have, negative social and economic consequences.
So it's important to monitor those trends
Yes.
and consider policies to promote more equitable outcomes.
Exactly. Now, Unit 10 delves into the world of financial indicators, which can seem a bit daunting at first.
Financial indicators, it's always seemed to be moving so fast it's hard to keep up.
I know what you mean, but understanding these indicators is, well, essential for navigating the financial landscape and making informed investment decisions.
So where do we even begin?
So the study guide starts by explaining different types of interest rates.
Okay.
It distinguishes between money market rates, which apply to short-term loans, and one market rates, which apply to longer-term loans.
Okay. So short-term loans would be things like, I don't know, overnight loans between banks.
Yes,
And long-term loans would be things like government bonds.
you got it. And understanding these different types of rates is, well, crucial for assessing the costs of borrowing and the returns on investment.
The study guide also mentions nominal and real interest rates.
Yes.
What's the difference again?
So nominal interest rates are the stated rates,
Okay.
while real interest rates are adjusted for inflation. So real interest rates give us a more accurate picture of the true cost of borrowing or the true return on an investment.
Right, because inflation erodes the value of money over time, so we need to factor that in.
Exactly. And Unit 10 also highlights how financial markets can, through their movements and fluctuations, provide insights into, well, economic expectations.
So it's like the market is a giant voting machine,
It is.
reflecting the collective wisdom, or sometimes fears,
Yes.
of investors.
That's a great analogy. And by understanding how to interpret market signals, we can glean really valuable information about future economic prospects.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like we're learning to speak the language of finance
You are.
and decipher the economic code.
You're getting the hang of it. Now, Unit 11 shifts our focus to fiscal indicators,
Okay.
which provide insights into government finances.
Fiscal indicators, those are always in the news, especially when we're talking about budget deficits and national debt.
They are, and for a good reason. Understanding fiscal indicators is crucial for assessing the sustainability of government finances and, of course, the impact of fiscal policy on the economy.
So where do we begin with all of this?
The study guide starts by describing the composition of the public sector, which includes, well, central government, provincial government, local government, and public corporations.
So it's like a multi-layered system
He is.
with different levels of responsibility
Yes.
and funding sources.
Exactly. And understanding how these different levels interact is essential for analyzing government finances. The study guide then delves into the different types of government spending, from compensation of employees to purchases of goods and services to interest payments on debt to capital expenditures on infrastructure.
It's amazing to think about all of the activities
It is.
that government spending covers.
And on the revenue side, the study guide explains the various sources of government income, primarily taxes.
Okay.
It distinguishes between direct taxes, like income tax,
Yeah.
and indirect taxes, like VAT.
Right. So direct taxes are levied on earnings and profits,
Yes,
while indirect taxes are levied on goods and services.
precisely. And understanding these different types of taxes is crucial for analyzing the impact of tax policy on individuals, businesses, and, well, the overall economy.
This is all starting to make sense. Now, the study guide also talks about the budget balance.
Yes.
What is that?
The budget balance is simply the difference between government revenue and expenditure.
Okay.
A surplus means that the government is taking in more money than it's spending,
Uh-huh.
while a deficit means, well, the opposite.
So a surplus is like saving money,
Exactly.
and a deficit is like going into debt.
And when the government runs a deficit, it has to borrow money to cover that shortfall, which adds to the public debt.
Right. And if the debt gets too big, it can be a real burden on future generations.
You're absolutely right. That's why it's so important to monitor these fiscal indicators and assess the sustainability of government finances. The study guide explains different ways to measure the budget balance.
Can you remind me what those are again?
We have the conventional budget balance, the current budget balance, the primary budget balance, and the structural budget balance. Each one gives a slightly different perspective on the government's fiscal position.
So it's like looking at the same picture
Exactly.
through different lenses.
And by understanding these different measures, we can get a more comprehensive view of the government's finances.
This is incredibly insightful. It's like we're learning to be economic detectives,
You are.
Uncovering the hidden stories
That's right.
behind the numbers?
Unit 12 broadens our perspective by introducing social and political indicators.
Ah, so this is where we start looking beyond the purely economic metrics, right? To consider the broader well-being of society.
Precisely. Unit 12 emphasizes that while economic indicators like GDP are important, they don't tell the whole story
Yeah.
of human development. We also need to consider factors like health, education, and political freedom.
So it's about looking at the quality of life,
Exactly.
not just the quantity of goods and services.
The study guide highlights several key social indicators, including birth rate, life expectancy, and education levels.
Okay, let's unpack those, starting with birth rate.
All right.
What insights can we get from that data?
So the birth rate tells us the number of live births per 1,000 people in a population over a certain period, usually a year. It's a measure of, well, how many new babies are being born.
So a higher birth rate suggests a growing population,
Yes,
and a lower birth rate suggests a shrinking or an aging population.
precisely. And these demographic shifts can have major implications for things like labor force participation, healthcare needs, and social security systems.
Makes sense. Now, what about life expectancy?
Okay.
Why is that such an important indicator?
Life expectancy is a powerful measure of a population's overall health and well-being. It tells us the average number of years a person born today can expect to live.
So a higher life expectancy generally suggests better health care,
Yes.
nutrition,
Uh-huh.
and living conditions.
Exactly. It's not just about living longer, but living healthier lives. Now, education levels refer to things like literacy rates, school enrollment rates, and the average number of years of schooling completed by a population.
So it's about access to knowledge and skills,
Exactly.
which are crucial for individual opportunity and economic growth.
You got it. Higher education levels are generally associated with higher incomes, better health outcomes, and greater civic engagement.
It's amazing to see how all of these social indicators paint a more holistic picture of human development. Now, the study guide also mentions the Human Development Index, or HDI.
Yes.
Remind me what that is again?
So the HDI is a composite statistic that combines indicators of life expectancy, education, and income to provide a broader measure of human development than just economic growth alone.
So it's a way to assess how well a country is doing
Precisely.
in terms of providing its citizens with a good life.
The HDI is used to rank countries based on their level of human development.
Okay.
It provides a valuable tool for comparison across different nations.
It's fascinating to see how these indicators go beyond those economic metrics to capture a broader sense of well-being. The study guide also touches on poverty, doesn't it?
It does. It distinguishes between absolute poverty, which refers to a lack of basic needs, like food, shelter, clothing, and relative poverty, which refers to having significantly less income than others in the same society.
So absolute poverty is about survival,
Yes.
and relative poverty is about social inclusion.
Exactly. And both types of poverty can have serious consequences for individuals and society as a whole.
Makes sense. The study guide also mentions political indicators.
It does. It highlights the importance of considering factors like political freedom, democracy, and governance when assessing a country's overall development.
Right, because economic progress is often intertwined with political and social progress.
Precisely. And indicators like freedom indices, corruption perception indices, and democracy rankings can provide valuable insights into a country's political landscape.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like we're gaining a more nuanced and comprehensive view of global development.
I'm glad you're finding it valuable. Now, Unit 13, the final unit in the study guide, emphasizes the importance of international comparisons.
Ah, yes. International comparisons. They can be a bit tricky, can't they? Because countries have different ways of measuring things.
You're absolutely right. The study guide highlights the challenges of comparing economic data across countries. It points out that definitions, data collection methods, and economic structures can vary significantly.
So it's not just about comparing apples and oranges.
Right.
It's about understanding the unique context of each country.
Precisely. And when making comparisons, it's crucial to be mindful of these differences.
Yeah.
And to use appropriate adjustments.
Like what?
Well, one common adjustment is currency conversion.
Okay.
To compare GDP figures across countries, for instance, we need to convert them into a common currency,
Okay.
like the US dollar.
That makes sense. Are there any other adjustments we need to be aware of?
Another important adjustment is purchasing power parity, or PPP.
Mm-hmm.
This takes into account differences in the cost of living across countries.
So a dollar might buy you more goods and services in one country than in another?
Exactly, and PPP adjustments help us make more meaningful comparisons of living standards across those different countries.
This is incredibly helpful. It's like we're learning to be more sophisticated consumers of economic data.
I'm glad you're finding it valuable. Now, before we wrap up, I want to emphasize a key takeaway from the study guide in our discussion today.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Understanding economic indicators is not just about memorizing definitions or crunching numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's about developing a critical thinking framework
Okay.
for analyzing economic trends, interpreting data, and making informed decisions.
So it's not about becoming an economist
Right.
overnight, but becoming more informed citizen.
Exactly. And by embracing curiosity, questioning assumptions, and seeking out diverse perspectives, we can all become more fluent in the language of economics.
This has been an incredibly enlightening journey.
It have been.
Through the world of economic indicators, I feel like I've gained a whole new toolkit.
It's quite toolkit, isn't it?
Yeah, for understanding how economies work. Now our deep dive is almost complete. But before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. You've mentioned several times that these indicators are just a starting point.
Yes.
What are some other ways that we can assess economic well-being?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. And it's something that economists and policymakers are increasingly grappling with. As we've seen, while indicators like GDP are valuable, they don't capture the full picture of human well-being.
So what are some alternatives or complements to these traditional indicators?
Well, one area that's gaining attention is the measurement of subjective well-being. Instead of just looking at objective factors like income or employment, researchers are exploring ways to measure things like happiness, life satisfaction, and sense of purpose.
So it's about understanding how people actually experience their lives,
Exactly.
not just their material conditions.
And these subjective well-being indicators can provide valuable insights into the quality of life and, well, the effectiveness of policies.
I'm intrigued. Are there any other alternative measures that we should be aware of?
Another area that's gaining traction is the measurement of environmental sustainability.
Okay.
As concerns about climate change and resource depletion grow, there is increasing recognition that we need to account for the environmental impact of economic activity.
Right, because economic growth that comes at the expense of the environment is ultimately unsustainable.
Precisely. And indicators like carbon emissions, ecological footprint, and resource depletion rates can help us track our progress towards, well, a more sustainable future.
This is incredibly insightful. It's like we're expanding our economic vocabulary to include a whole new set of values
Yes,
and priorities.
you're absolutely right. And as we move forward, it will be crucial to develop and refine these alternative indicators to ensure that economic progress is truly aligned with, well, human well-being and environmental sustainability.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of economic indicators. I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding about how the economy works, and I'm really excited to continue exploring these concepts.
It has been a journey.
Yeah, it has. Now, before we conclude this deep dive, I wanted to see if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yes, actually I do. So our deep dive is almost complete, but let's shift our focus back to the present, okay? And explore some additional economic indicators that can be valuable for understanding the South African economy. Our supplementary notes, they highlight some pretty intriguing concepts that, well, weren't covered in the study guide.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are some of these hidden gems?
One concept that caught my eye is the informal sector.
Okay.
It's often overlooked in traditional economic statistics, but it plays a significant role in, well, many developing economies, including South Africa.
Right, because not all economic activity is officially, recorded or taxed.
Exactly. The informal sector includes activities like street vending, small-scale manufacturing, domestic work. It provides livelihoods for millions of people, but it also presents challenges for data collection
Yeah.
and policy making.
So how do we even begin to measure something that's largely, hidden from view?
It is tricky, but there are methods for estimating the size and contribution of the informal sector. Researchers use surveys, household expenditure data, even satellite imagery to try to capture these activities.
Wow, that's some serious economic detective work.
It is, and understanding the informal sector is crucial for getting a complete picture of economic activity, employment, and income distribution.
This is all incredibly insightful. It's like we're learning to see the economy through a new lens, one that reveals these hidden dynamics.
Precisely. And another concept highlighted in the notes is the limitations of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index.
Okay, remind me what the CPI measures features again?
The CPI tracks the average change in prices paid by urban consumers for, a basket of goods and services.
So it's supposed to reflect how much more expensive it's becoming to buy the things we need.
Exactly. But the notes point out that the CPI might not accurately reflect the inflation experiences of, well, all households.
Interesting, why not?
Well, for one thing, the basket of goods and services used to calculate the CPI, it might not be representative of the spending patterns of all households, okay? For example, households in rural areas or lower income households, they might have different consumption patterns than those captured in that CPI basket.
So the CPI might overstate or understate inflation for certain groups.
Exactly. Additionally, the CPI doesn't fully account for changes in quality or the introduction of new products.
So if a new smartphone comes out with twice the features,
Yes,
at the same price, the CPI wouldn't reflect that improvement in value.
precisely. And as technology advances and consumer preferences evolve, these limitations, well, they become increasingly relevant.
This is all incredibly important to consider. It's a reminder that even these seemingly objective economic indicators can have blind spots
Absolutely.
and biases.
And as informed citizens and decision makers, we need to be aware of these limitations and seek out, well, alternative sources of information to get a more complete picture.
Well said. This deep dive has been an incredible journey from the foundations of macroeconomics to the nuances of specific indicators. I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding about how the economy works.
I'm delighted to hear that. And remember that the world of economics is constantly evolving. New challenges emerge, new data becomes available, new theories are developed, so it's an ongoing process of learning and discovery.
Absolutely. And by embracing curiosity, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, we can all become more fluent in the language of economics. Well said. This deep dive has been a true masterclass in economic literacy. We've covered so much ground today, from the fundamentals of GDP to the intricacies of the balance of payments, all while focusing on the unique context of the South African economy. We've learned how to interpret economic data, identify trends, and understand the forces shaping our world. And hopefully you feel empowered to use this newfound knowledge to make more informed decisions, whether you're investing in the market, evaluating government policies, or simply trying to make sense of the economic headlines. Remember, economic data is all around us, shaping our lives in countless ways. By learning to read its language, we can become more active and engaged citizens, shaping the future of our economy and our society. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and happy data diving.